Stop it. All right, we are live.
We are live. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here for the Community Planning and Transportation Committee meeting for August. We have several items on the agenda, and we got to get done by 6 due to another meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the monthly ridership report, public transit ridership report from staff.
Thank you, Councilmember Holman. Hope you can hear me. Always want to do a mic check. Okay. I'll go through my report real quick. I know you guys got a full agenda, so please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll take questions at the end, of course. But for fixed route ridership, the numbers were in July. This is for this past month, 15,128. Still a little bit less compared to last year. But if you look at those graphs that are provided in my report, you'll see that since April, we've been on an upward trajectory, since we had ridership restrictions and the pandemic really hit Norman. So we're slowly increasing in our ridership, and you can see that in paratransit as well. Paratransit transported just over 1,000 passengers in July, and we've had 0 trips requested denied due to capacity. And that's largely because the ridership is so down, we're more easily able to accommodate those trips. So quickly moving on to some transit updates at the bottom of the first page, talking about the long range plan update. We've had 2 biweekly meetings with Nelson Nygaard, the consultant hired on July 14th. We've been working on data needs, so trying to give them as much data that we've collected since taking over the system, as well as we could get from the university and from ACOG and other sources. Working on a plan branding, so something that's easily identifiable for citizens, and something that isn't too elaborate, but we can really use as a way to talk about this plan in the future too, and people will know what we're talking about. And then an outreach plan. So as you can imagine, outreach is always an important part of any planning study or updating any document that concerns the public. But even more importantly now is how do we get public comments in a mostly virtual meeting setting. So we're still working on that outreach plan, and we should be talking about a draft at our next staff and consultant meeting, and hopefully have some more information about that in the next few weeks of opportunities to talk about the plan. And then finally, on transit updates, our first Saturday service was on August 15th. That's the first time since January 2019. We're very excited about that. We're hoping that the citizens know about that, but if anybody on this call has any other avenues for reaching out to citizens, please feel free to do that, let them know. And I'm happy to speak to anybody if they have any questions about that. August 10th was the first day that the commuter route was being operated solely by Embark OKC, and they expanded that route to include 9 runs Monday through Friday each weekday, instead of the 6 runs that were being offered by the two entities in the past. So we're hoping that this service becomes more usable for both of our communities, and we get some more cars off the road. And then this is an unfortunate bullet, the third one, but we were notified that our competitive grant application for a vehicle wash facility and the CNG replacement vehicles was not awarded by the FTA. This is an annual competitive grant, so we will go back for some funding next year once we identify what is most appropriate. But on a follow-up note, the last thing I want to mention is we are working on a competitive grant application to the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality for a battery electric bus. This is a part of the Volkswagen settlement, and they've allocated, I think, $3.5 million for on-the-road vehicles, and transit is lumped into that. So it's a $900,000 to $1 million bus. $3.5 million doesn't go a long way for all the entities that I'm sure will be applying, but we feel confident that our application will be competitive, and we'll let council know where we land in that application process. We're planning on taking a resolution of support to council at the second September meeting, and including that with our application that's due at the end of the month. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, I really appreciate the update and information, Taylor. It's a really valuable info, and I definitely would encourage everybody to share that Saturday service is back with your constituents. And if you're staff watching, to let your family or friends, everybody know Saturday service is back. And I'm really excited to hear that the commuter express route is running more frequently than old times. So that's I think a real positive thing that our system is expanding, maybe just a little bit at a time. So are there any questions from council about the update on transit? I don't see any. I don't know. Okay, Lee, Councilmember Hall.
I was just curious about the branding piece, just because we have talked about that in the past, and for lots of different reasons decided to put that off. So I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on what you're working on.
Yeah, so in relation to what I specifically mentioned a few minutes ago, for the long range transit plan, the document that'll kind of guide or help guide our decision making on transit improvements over the next 5, 10, 20 years, we're specifically talking about branding for that plan. So I'm trying to think of a good example. So Plan Norman, for the comprehensive plan update, the name of that plan was Plan Norman. That's specifically what I'm talking about, Councilmember
Okay.
Hall.
Yeah, I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm interested in seeing that too. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments? I don't see any. Okay, thank you, Taylor. I appreciate that. And we'll see you here next month for the next update. Okay, we'll move on to number 2 on the agenda today. Can everybody hear me when I switch the screen over to look at the agenda? Because I have to
You need to see your face.
I know, but when I look at the agenda, I have to change it's on the other screen.
I'll bring you a packet.
Okay.
Virtual world problems.
In here.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that because switching back and forth between looking at the agenda and being on video, and if it keeps the stream going. But
I usually have 2 or 3 things going at the same time. It's crazy.
I'm working off 3 devices right now in tandem.
Me too.
yeah, I usually have my computer at home on next to me as well. But okay, so number 2 is a continued discussion regarding temporary use of parking lots and/or spaces for outdoor dining uses. This is because with COVID-19, we've seen a lot of places, a lot of cities, and a lot of states around the country have reduced or even eliminated indoor seating altogether. And we've seen a lot of examples of cities allowing parking spots in front of buildings to be temporarily used as temporary outdoor seating for restaurants and things like that. So we thought it'd be a good idea to explore that option here and see if we might be able to help the businesses in Norman get through this a little better.
I have a PowerPoint that just kind of summarizes what's in the memos, since you can't look at your memos and the screen at the same time. If you want me to go through that.
Thank you, Catherine.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Click. Okay. So as Councilmember Holman said, cities across the country have been getting creative to help small businesses that have been impacted by COVID-19 related regulations. A lot of places where you see this are places where perhaps their restaurants were required to be completely closed for indoor seating. And so they were allowing some outdoor seating in lieu of indoor seating. But you're seeing it more and more across the country. They've been using parking lots, private parking lots, public parking spaces, things like that to extend the dining areas. And as we discussed back in July, we've been allowing more sidewalk permits for sidewalk cafes. This is what I showed you back in July, kind of some ideas about how this might work and look. And these are from Boulder and Fort Collins, I believe. So in Boulder, They started allowing temporary outdoor expansions into the public right of way back in May. Initially, they allowed it just for restaurants, and then it was expanded in June for other retail, office, personal service, gathering type events. They require that you obtain a revocable permit that's issued by the city manager and is evaluated based on the public health, safety, and welfare impacts, of course. They look at a balance of the needs of the commercial users or commercial uses to have an economically viable use balanced with the needs of the surrounding property owners. They look at access to utility infrastructure. Are you blocking manholes? Are emergency personnel still able to get through? Can we get to the stormwater drains? Those kind of things. Adequate access through the area, and then the health convenience of business employees, customers, residents, visitors to the area. And then they look at the term of the permit. So how long is the business proposing to engage in this practice? What are their hours of operation? Is it every day? And then the impacts to others in the area. And this initial order expires in September. Of course, Colorado's weather is a lot different from ours, so they'll be getting colder as we'll finally be getting maybe a little bit more reasonable with our temperature. So you'll see both Colorado orders expire in September, although I wouldn't be surprised if they extended it through October. Fort Collins is very similar. It's just for restaurants, liquor licensed establishments, and retail establishments. So not office uses, not other gatherings and things like that. Here they're reviewed by the city engineer and they're evaluated based on pretty similar criteria. Is it safe? Is it mitigating the impact to the public's ability to safely and conveniently bypass the proposed closure? Do they comply with all applicable laws, including ADA? And that's an important one when you're talking about perhaps shutting down or limiting access on sidewalks. Maintaining adequate emergency access and compatibility with other activities in the vicinity, and that one expires on September 27th. Stillwater just adopted last week, I think, maybe the week before, a temporary outdoor expansion permit in adjacent public ways and parking lots. It's for restaurants and bars only, so no retail uses, and they're pretty similar to Norman in terms of what they've done to address COVID. So they haven't got a lot of these places completely shut down to indoor uses. So this is just a way to allow these businesses to expand and socially distance their tables is really what it's all about. You've seen the pictures from the bar area in Stillwater. A little bit different from where our areas are of that type of business, but they were really wanting to address the huge crowds and enable those smaller businesses to be able to spread their folks out. So this is also a revocable permit setup. The revocable permit would be issued by the city manager and evaluated based on a number of criteria. Of course, the business has to already have a permit location in Stillwater, be up to date on licensing and permits. This is something I did not see in the other policies, and I think we would want to include it in ours, is some sort of liability insurance that would indemnify the city and protect the city if there's some kind of accident or injury. Their extended service area is limited to the immediately adjacent sidewalk, on-street parking area, and or private lot. And some of this is because of the Able Commission rules, so I'll talk about that more in a minute. It has to be enclosed by a physical barrier to both separate the service area from the public right-of-way, but also to make sure people who aren't customers aren't able to get in the area, and that is especially important for bars. And then, of course, this was also not explicitly spelled out in the other policies, but we would probably want to spell it out in ours. We want it to be socially distanced. This is to give you more space to spread out, not more space to cram people in. And then ADA access must be provided into the extended service area. Their order expires November 30th. That coincides with, I believe, their mask ordinance and ours. So that's a pretty consistent date so far in Oklahoma. We have a number of processes for events, for closing parking spaces, closing streets, allowing for sidewalk dining. So I'll just talk about those really quickly. The special event permits That's not for, your typical outdoor dining, restaurant by restaurant. This is larger festivals, lots of people, open to the public, lasting longer than 2 hours. Music festival, an art walk are two of the probably, and game day, I guess, three of the most common special events in Norman. But it allows for a review of street closures, for placing of barricades and things like that to make sure the whole area is operated safely. So that would be more than likely a 1 or 2 day event where you're shutting down streets and really limiting access at all to the area. We do allow parking variances. This is a process that goes through the police department, and that if you want to rent or reserve a couple of the parking spaces in front of your business for a sidewalk sale or something like that, we've allowed that before, but you have to allow adequate access to pedestrians and emergency personnel. Sidewalk dining, this is something we've pushed more lately, but it really is limited by the size of the sidewalk. We have to make sure we can maintain public access, but it does allow restaurants to have outdoor food service adjacent to the business within the sidewalk. So we talked about the issues to consider in July, and I've got some suggestions here on the next slide, but we want to make sure we have accessible pedestrian access. The dining areas need to be protected from traffic. You don't want to just sit them out in a parking space. There's got to be some kind of barrier to really make it work. And you saw some examples of barriers that people are using in other cities that look quite nice and vary depending on the restaurant or bar. The loss of public parking, so how many spaces would we be blocking off? There are a lot of businesses that maybe wouldn't be eligible for this type of permit or wouldn't be interested in it. And so how do you make sure they still have access to their business? And then the ABLE license is a big piece of this because restaurants, of course, mostly serve alcohol or some kind of alcoholic beverage. Most of our restaurants have an ABLE license for that purpose. And the ABLE license says you can only serve alcohol in the licensed premise. And so they do say it includes adjacent premises if it's in control of the licensee and used in connection with the business. And so if we allow them to use the area of the sidewalk immediately adjacent to the business, that's how we've made the sidewalk permits work. We've let ABLE know that we've permitted that, and they will allow it as well because it's immediately adjacent to the business, and you're basically leasing that space to be in control of the business. The issue here, I think, if we spread that out into the parking spaces, you can't really leave a spot of a means of passage on the sidewalk and have the area in the parking lot be immediately adjacent to the business. And so what Stillwater is doing is requiring the businesses to provide another path. So essentially they pull the dining in on the parking spaces, and then the sidewalk goes along the outside of the parking spaces. So they're just kind of redirecting it, providing a ramp, and redirecting them out closer to the traffic, which presents different issues. And then, of course, like I said, coordination with adjacent properties is important because of the parking issues, especially. In terms of a process we could look at if we wanted to do something like that here, I think a revocable permit with a limited amount of time is probably the best way to go. We could require safety barriers. That takes the burden off of staff from providing and coming up with the safety barriers. We only have so many, and that takes a lot of effort on the part of the staff to get those things out for larger events. But if this is going to go through November, it might be a worthy expense for a business to install some safety barriers that could be removed at the end of the permitted period. We want to make sure there's adequate access to both the expansion area and around it. Again, I think we would want to include social distancing. The whole point of this is to give you more seats, not to cram more people necessarily. And then I really liked the insurance and indemnification provisions in Stillwater's policy. I think that's a good idea for us. As far as coming up with a process internally, who would approve? I think evaluation by the police department is certainly necessary, but so is Public Works because we're in the streets here. We're looking at safety issues, both with traffic and just pedestrian safety. And then the expiration date, like I said, with Stillwater, theirs ends November 30th. That coincides with their mask ordinance and with our mask ordinance sunset date. So that seems to make some sense. Plus, we don't usually get too cold before November 30th. So it's probably something that could be workable for the businesses as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I appreciate the research and presentation about this. There were a couple things I would mention that this concept is actually mentioned and conceptually drawn in the Center City policy on Gray Street, actually. It talks a lot about using the angled parking spaces as parklets or outdoor dining space. And I guess it just so happens this kind of event has accelerated interest in it. So we sort of have talked about it in Norman before, but hasn't really gone real far until now. So one of my main questions, though, is about ABLE. In Colorado, is it ABLE, or is it a different type of entity that regulates alcohol in Colorado, or is that nationwide? Not as familiar.
State by state, they have a similar entity that manages the licensing, and their governor actually waived some of those requirements in a statewide order. And that's what really opened the door for the cities to be a little more creative about how they approach this.
Colorado or Boulder, they probably aren't having to redirect pedestrian traffic around and into the street, I'm guessing, because of that.
Right. They can serve in the parking spaces and maintain the sidewalk access.
Okay. Yeah, that is maybe the one little hiccup I have about that. I'm interested that Stillwater went ahead and approved it anyway, but that would be a little bit of a hurdle that I don't know if I'd have a whole lot of hope of our governor doing the same, unfortunately.
Well, that's why Stillwater specifies it has to be sidewalk and parking spaces, and that you're rewriting that sidewalk around that space to make sure it's immediately adjacent.
Right.
They are talking to ABLE, and we are talking to ABLE, trying to figure out if there's a creative way to address this without the governor. If ABLE could do something, and they're open to creative solutions, we just haven't come up with one yet.
Okay. Okay, so that's the questions I had come up with, though. I do agree. I like what Stillwater has done. I like what Boulder's done a lot. I think kind of a mix of those have some pretty good stuff in it. But are there any questions, comments from other members of the committee? Can't see everybody, but
Lee has her hand up.
Okay, well, I just wanted to comment because I was not part of the conversation at the July meeting, but I like linking the temporary aspect of it to the end of the mask ordinance on November 30th. I think that's a good date. And the social distancing, as you mentioned, I think is really important that we make sure that we're clear that this is not to gather more people. This is to help you spread out people. And I think that'll be an important message to get across. I was also wondering about the safety barriers. Would that be left up to the business and they could do whatever they want, or was it something that we could provide? Or if we weren't going to provide that, would we have standards of what we expected them to provide as far as creating that barrier?
Yes, I think ideally we would create some standards. This is what Stillwater's doing. They're sort of lining out, this is the expectation and this is what we need for safety reasons. And then the property owner or the restaurant owner is providing the barrier that's in compliance with those specifications.
Okay. Let's see. And I do agree that the insurance piece is probably really important. So on the revocable permit, it seems like the city manager was the person who approved that in most of the other 3 examples. So is there any reason we wouldn't want to do that?
No, I think it still needs to be reviewed by, other departments, but he could be the one that issues it.
Right, I agree. I mean, clearly the police department and public works needs to be involved. Do we have any anecdotal reports at this time of how it's working in Stillwater and how many are participating or anything like that?
Not yet. I think it's been somewhat of a slow rollout. They just adopted that 7 days ago, maybe on the 20th, I want to say.
Mhm.
So it's not been, it's not had an immediate impact yet. I know there's some literature out there about some safety issues where there have been accidents. The ones I saw were in New York City, which, I mean, I love New York, but I wouldn't want to sit in the street of New York and die. So I'm not surprised there were accidents there. But I haven't seen a lot of stories from other cities similar to Norman.
Mhm. So I guess I'm really imagining this being the most used in the campus corner and downtown area, but I was also curious on our sidewalk permits that we started this summer. Are those spread across the city? Do we know that? Or are they concentrated in our more walkable areas?
The sidewalk dining permits that we currently have issued are just downtown and on Campus Corner.
Okay. And how many businesses have taken advantage of that? Do we know?
Cindy, do you?
Well, actually, just one.
Okay.
A lot of them already have sidewalk
Yeah,
dining permits.
we had several that already had them, and so they were just able to do alcohol out there as well.
Okay.
But Campus Corner is pretty limited in that their sidewalks aren't wide enough.
Mhm.
So unless you're on a corner like Louis or something like that, or Starbucks, there's not enough room for them to leave the clear path of travel for pedestrians and put table and chairs out.
So this could really help them out if we could figure out the adjacency piece, I'm guessing. And just looking through this too about where we would start, it seems like maybe we would want to limit it to restaurants and bars and not put retail in there for right now. I'm not hearing any particular issues with overcrowding in our retail establishments. Is anybody else?
Just the big box ones.
Okay, so not too worried.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for now, but I really hope that we can move forward with this and solve some of these little puzzle pieces, because I think it's a great addition.
Any other comments, questions from committee members? Councilor Patron.
I wonder if we might be, could consider, I mean, I really like the outdoor dining aspect, period. But on the downtown area, my concerns is after dark, to where cars can't see quite as well, people getting up quickly or whatever. So I'm wondering if we could potentially put some of those flashing traffic in the area to let drivers know, like, you're approaching an area that, you need to be more cautious. I don't know, just a thought about what we would do after dark. Even if there was cheap LED lighting, strip lighting that the places put up along there that doesn't need to be plugged in. Just a thought. I don't know if we might want to brainstorm on that, or at least give some guidance to the restaurants about picking up something like that.
Yeah, I would think I would agree. Any kind of barrier should have some sort of reflective stickers, something on there that of course our traffic and public works would approve of course. But especially, our main street being one way and traffic can definitely move pretty quickly on it at times. So definitely concerned about
What time does the time change, or what month is that?
It's
October.
October, yeah.
yeah, it's getting dark at 7:30 Wait, no, I'm looking at New York City actually.
November 1st is, it's a little later, so that's better, but still, I was just kind of thinking about with kids not, whether a lot of kids, even though they're going back to school, if they enrolled in blended or in person, a whole lot still just enrolled in virtual. So I can see later dining with families and kids not being quite as aware of the fact that just because you're sitting outside at dinner doesn't mean, this isn't typical for the area. So drivers might not be quite so on guard. So I would just like to see maybe, they don't even need to plug in. If there was some way to do, like I say, a $20 LED strip lighting is going to grab some attention.
8:01 p.m. is sunset currently. Okay. Any other comments, questions from council on this one? Would everybody like to go ahead and let the full council take a look at this in a study session?
I think if we can flush out some of those standard details too, that would really help, because you could throw in that reflective surface, the lighting height, how bright the bulbs need to be, you can probably even look at shade and some other things too. So get all that baked into the standards and let us, pick it apart.
Yeah. Okay. Because if we brought it back to this committee, it'd be at the end of next month. And I don't know how much help that would be. Maybe still some for October, November, but if we can get that on a near thing, address some of those things, and the whole council can look at it, and then we can figure out what everybody wants to do from there. So if everybody's okay with that.
A whole section of our ordinances now dedicated to pandemics. This might be a good place to add it.
Yeah.
And if we end up making any other changes to that ordinance after your discussion on Tuesday, that might be something we could bring all together.
Okay. If that's it from council on this item. Okay. Councilmember Hall.
Sorry, one more thing. I guess I'm really been thinking about the barriers, the safety barriers, and what's going to be acceptable and unacceptable. So if we could get maybe some feedback from Public Works on what they think would meet that standard.
I've got a thought on that.
Okay.
Councilor Peacock,
The wooden barrels you showed in the picture, those filled with sand are going to make a really low cost, low impact barrier. And it looks pretty nice. So I think if you do that, add some lighting, some string lights or something to it, you really got a nice little setting. So.
Well, and the other one I'm thinking about is Midway Deli just recently, of course, this isn't in a parking space, but Midway Deli just recently converted their patio for more intensive outdoor use. And they have, looks like, planters that wouldn't be really expensive. And they've planted bamboo that also create kind of a visual separation between the street and the seating area. So, but I just wondered how safe that would be if you had that, in the street. So that just was another one I was thinking about, but I think that's important to understand what's going to be acceptable and not. So
absolutely agree. Okay. All right, then we will look forward to the whole council taking a look at this at the next available opportunity. Okay, thank you, Catherine, for that presentation. Okay, next up, item number 3 on the agenda is a continued discussion regarding female cottonwood, Bradford pear, and red cedar trees on public property. We talked about this last month. I've had at least one constituent of mine that was having a problem with a cottonwood tree in a city park impacting her property. And the city's talked about Bradford pears and red cedars before in the past. So kind of an update from our staff on where we might sit on some recommendations, even from, I think, the tree board on what we might do. So Tim Vermillion is here and give us some information. Thank you, Tim.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay. I'll start out with a little history for any of those who weren't here the last time. A lady called me out to a neighborhood by Cedar Lane. I can't remember the name of it. And there's a weird, it's not a park, but it's an inholding where it's public land. It's kind of behind the neighborhood And then on the other side of that green belt, there's a neighborhood. So it's sandwiched in between there, and it's owned by the city. And she called saying, hey, my yard is covered, my gutters are covered, my compressor's covered with cottonwood seed. Can you help me? What can we do? Can we get rid of that tree? And I went out there and talked to her and looked at it. It is bad. I didn't actually see her, but the whole point of this is she's unable to take care of it herself. And so that's really the problem, is the defining the problem is really important. And I think I've defined it by the problem is some people are unable to clean up the cottonwood seed. So she contacted some of her neighbors, and they called me as well. And I said, look, there's nothing I can really do. I can't just cut down cottonwood trees because of seed dispersal. So you need to call your council member and make them aware that you're being impacted by the city negatively, and see what we can do about it. So I've come up with some different alternatives, just brainstorming with other people. One is do nothing. Another one is remove the trees from public property that are causing the problem. Another that Councilmember Patron came up with was provide vouchers to get a new tree if a private tree owner, say that in this particular lady, she has a cottonwood in her neighbor's backyard as well that's affecting her. So if someone agreed to cut it down, maybe the city or the Norman Park Foundation through the city could provide them a voucher for a tree to replace the female cottonwood they're removing. Another alternative would be to develop a fund or some sort of volunteer group to help those who can demonstrate a real need, to have someone go and just at least take the seed off their compressor. And then another one alternative would be an HOA or an individual personally funds the removal on a case-by-case basis with a neighborhood vote. At ODOT, sound wall, I worked at ODOT for 6 years. Sound walls, if they qualify for them, if there's enough noise, the neighborhood has to vote, get a 51% vote on putting up a sound wall in front of their neighborhood. So that'd be a way to make it somewhat fair to everyone in the town, into the neighborhood. Now, I have not spoken to one single person other than that constituent that is in favor of removing cottonwood trees, female cottonwood trees. I talked to the tree board. The tree board feels it's a slippery slope. I did not mention Eastern Red Cedar or Bradford or Calorie Pear. It's not just Bradford. I'm sure they would support that. And the city, as a general rule, like take Ruby Grant, for example, we're clearing out all invasive and noxious type species like cedar, pear, tree of heaven, lacebark elm, things that don't belong in our native environment. But with that being said, they're here because there's no fire. Normally fire would keep cedars at bay, but we don't live like that anymore. But that's really why there's all this happening. So there's a concept of managing public lands to a certain time period. And I kind of feel like through cedar eradication and pear eradication, we're keeping it, barely pre-settlement in the open old fields around Norman. Now, another thing I learned at ODOT, which helps me kind of frame this, is this a significant impact? The word significant is used in federal environmental documents to indicate something needs to be mitigate this problem. And I don't know if this is significant. It is for that lady who has no help, but to a lot of people, most people just say, hey, I just get out there and do it. So I don't really know what the ethical right thing to do is, and I don't know what the city's capable of doing. I spoke to the state urban forester and his assistant. Neither one, I had to tell them, quit attacking the messenger. They were so against this idea of removing female cottonwoods off public lands. And they're very practical people. So I was kind of alarmed how mad they got. So that's really what I've been doing, thinking about. I have looked at other some other cities. Most cities just banned them from being part of, city projects. We're not going to plant cottonwoods on a city project unless they're the male cultivar. There are some communities that do, though, enforce this even on private lands at the owner's expense. You can't have certain species on private land. That's pretty far reaching, but it goes from nobody cares all the way to that extreme from my research. And then one of Councilmember Holman's constituent, I think it's the caller actually, did a bunch of research and came up with a whole bunch of links and things you can look at about what other cities and towns are doing. So as far as Eastern red cedar, it is an ill-mannered tree, but it usually takes over abandoned fields, through birds dispersing the seed. Same with calorie pear. It takes over abandoned fields, but it's even more aggressive than cedar. So I have a 100% eradication policy for me on any pear I see coming up wild, because they have thorns and they're not they're no longer the calorie pear that you bought at Lowe's or Home Depot. It's the other one, it's the wild one. So that's what I have. Any questions or anything you guys want me to work on, research?
Well, I really appreciate the work you've done on this, Tim, and the helping us understand the issue better, for sure, and reaching out to get feedback from multiple sources too. That's very helpful. Out of the options you kind of gave there, I would definitely like to see us just in general pursue some sort of tree replacement thing. I have no idea how we might fund that situation, but I am interested in the city being able to do that, or there being some sort of tree replacement or a fund that can help people that are unable to, through disability or elderly or whatever it may be, that they are unable to clean these, to take care of this stuff. Some sort of fund, could be private, public, both. I'm not sure what that would even look like, but I like the idea of it. I would like the idea of HOAs. My concern about that is, a lot of neighborhoods don't have them anymore. Some areas aren't allowed to have them, I think so, in the central part of town. And in this particular neighborhood, I don't think Eagle Cliff has one anymore, a functioning one anymore. So, but I do like a couple of those suggestions for sure. So is any comment or question from our other committee members about this? Yeah, Councilmember Peacock.
Yeah, and in terms of that private partnership, this seems like a perfect opportunity for our electric companies to step up and maybe garner some goodwill or positive PR from all the trees that we've lost in recent years. So I think that might be a good first step. And I also want to commend Mr. Vermillion's efforts on Eastern red cedar. I know in terms of conservation efforts, that one is a really big, thorn in the side, I guess, pun not intended. But yeah, just thumbs up on that one. Keep up the hard work. Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of reaching out to utility companies, OG&E or OEC, and seeing about what their ability maybe would be to help out with something like this, a project like this. Any other comments from other committee members about this?
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
I'm still interested in perhaps an ordinance going forward on landscaping for especially, I don't think anybody puts in red cedars as part of their landscaping, but they certainly do still on the Bradford pears. And again, eventually we're going to be, it's just a matter of which storm that we're going to be picking that thing up and paying for it. So I still would be interested in a perhaps a voucher, or if they're ready to get rid of it, it's starting to look ugly, but also an ordinance going forward saying that, we're phasing that tree out. We don't really want that used in new development landscaping, because it is a cheap way and a fast.
Bradford pear. Oh, I'm sorry, broke up.
I'm still seeing people planting them is the problem. So
okay.
I would still be interested to see us discuss getting, an ordinance to where we're not having this tree that we're going to end up paying for later as a city.
Mhm. Well, the pear's been off of Bradford anyways, off of the landscaping approved tree list since 2002. Maybe someone put it back on. I don't know. Or maybe no one's, going to see what gets installed after a new business is put in. But how would we, just through public awareness, try to encourage private citizens not to plant them? Because I do see them being planted in people's yards.
Yeah, and maybe it can't be sold in city limits. Maybe that's, because people are just picking them up at Lowe's and Home Depot and sticking them in their yard, thinking, it looks nice, it's a fast grower, and for a couple years until the storm takes it. So maybe we just say, look, you can't sell those in city limits. If you want it bred for pear, you're gonna have to work really hard for it. You have to drive to a tree farm or something. I don't know.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. And I did reach out to OEC about what they do as far as how does their voucher program work. And it was, made sense. They just hand them a gift card to Markham's or wherever, if the condition warrants a replacement tree. And OG&E did not respond, but I know the guy pretty well. He may have not seen my email, but so anyways, I think what I'll do is approach OEC and OG&E and see if they'd like to kind of sponsor a replace female cottonwoods that are causing trouble for people on an individual basis with a replacement tree.
I think even if they want to organize a volunteer effort to go and do these cleanups, on a case-by-case basis, maybe they've got an outreach number or something they'd be willing to set up. Just thought.
That's a good idea.
That's what I was wondering too, because this is, one person who really does need some help, and how could we plug her in? Because it's Eagle Cliff, is that what you said? And
Yes.
There's no HOA there.
No.
And in Core Norman, that's not even an option. We've had this conversation many times, but it does sort of point out the value of being connected to your neighbors and being able to reach out for help. But maybe there's a volunteer group we could plug into that would be willing to go over and help her.
I'll just say, I think she's watching. I'll be willing to go volunteer for sure to help her out. So just I'll help my sister do it for sure.
I don't know if she's elderly or disabled, but on the elderly side of it, it could be that the senior center, we have somebody that works for the city currently. I don't know exactly how that whole facility works, but I know it's under Parks and Rec. So maybe if we had a program through there that the outreach done in that way, I don't know.
That's a good idea.
Okay, so I think it looks like we might want to keep discussing this particular issue involving some changes we might want to make. Maybe I agree with Tim about the recommendation of we don't want to cut them down, and the tree board as well recommending that we wouldn't want to do that. But some other recommendations made by other committee members about just general changes to some of the policies regarding trees and landscaping requirements and stuff like that. So we want to have a further discussion here in this committee again.
Well, I could possibly update you guys. If you don't want to have it there again, I could be working on this with Jason and the Senior Center Parks and Recreation staff and get a hold of OG&E and OEC and see what they want to do. And then I could report it to you at the next meeting or however you all want me to send it to you.
Okay. I'd be okay with it coming back to next month and we can just get an update and see what we'd like. Okay. Well, thank you very much again, Tim. I really appreciate all the work you've done. And if we haven't told you lately, we just really love having you back on staff. Your position is already proven to be extremely valuable in my experience. So
you already know. Fan club.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 4. Since we have, let's see, an hour and 10 minutes until 6 o'clock, I would want to ask, Councilor Hall and I have asked for this particular item to be on the agenda. We've put it off quite a while. The item number 5 is really important as well, and maybe more pressing. I might just maybe hear from Sean if he thinks we might want to discuss one of them over the other tonight, the Porter one over the parking restrictions, and maybe talk about the parking next month. I'm not sure what you might recommend if we should do that or not based on the time we have left.
You're happy to do whatever your pleasure, Councilmember. I think we can work through the on-street parking pretty quickly. If you'll allow us, David Reesman's going to take you through that. And again, if you think it's going to drag out, we can move that. But these are 3 areas that we really need to get addressed. Citizens,
okay. Well, let's move. Thank you, Sean. Then we'll move right into it then. Item number 4, a discussion regarding on-street parking restrictions on Lincoln Avenue, Iowa Street, and Acres Street. I think there was even some discussion about Sims, West Sims as well. So not on here, but I think we have Councilmember Hall had brought that one up before. So thank you very much, Sean, for being here.
Thank you. And David Reesman's going to take you through this one. So David, take it from there.
Thank you, David.
Like David might be having some trouble with his audio.
Yeah, I don't see him either.
How about if we do this? I'll take the Porter corridor road diet item, and then David can pick it up after that, if you don't mind.
Okay. So we will skip over to number 5 on the agenda, which is a discussion regarding Porter corridor road diet.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen with you. So again, just a quick update. I think it's actually Councilmember Holman and perhaps Councilor Hall who asked the staff after a recent public meeting on the Porter corridor project to bring back maybe some updated traffic modeling information and just update the previous technical information on the Porter corridor. As a result of input, we continue to get lots of input about possible road diets, reducing Porter Avenue in the downtown area to 3 lanes and that sort of thing. So it's been an ongoing issue and debate for about 10 years, certainly, or more since the Porter corridor study. So that's what we've done. David is our staff traffic engineer, and we don't do a lot of this in-depth modeling, but he got creative and did that for us, and hopefully he's going to be able to join us, because I'm going to have him actually pull up the modeling software so you can actually see it. But I'll take you through a few slides here. I also want to acknowledge many of these were put together by Angelo Lombardo, so I'm playing Angelo again today, and he really would be a much better presenter and much better source than me, but he's slowly retiring on us, so I'm going to do the best I can. And then David's here with us. Scott Sturts is here with us as the city engineer, and I think Paul DeAndre is with us, but both of them are managing the Porter and Acres and Porter corridor project. So we're here to kind of talk you through that as it relates to those 2 projects coming up. So again, here's what we know. The last really detailed modeling of Porter Avenue corridor was last performed in about 2010. And this was kind of a predecessor to the city's comprehensive transportation plan. It was kind of at the end of the Porter corridor study when we started to have concerns about that discussion of the road diet. And then it was also a predecessor to the Porter and Acres intersection design process. So that's the last time we did it in some detail. The traffic data from the 2010 models is again pretty old now and doesn't reflect some of the recent really important developments in that area. We've listed 3 of them here. First, we've got a brand new central library on Acres Street, which has generated lots of new traffic and changed the traffic patterns in the area quite a bit. We've got the potential for a 2-way Gray Street. In fact, that's going to happen sometime next year or in the next year and a half. as part of the 2019 bond program. That's going to change traffic patterns on Gray Street, and particularly at the Gray and Porter intersection, pretty dramatically. And then as we know, the redevelopment of the Norman Regional Health Center Porter campus, which looks very promising, including a senior center. That too will probably be more intensive use and probably more intensive traffic to Porter Avenue. So that's kind of what we have put into the new model. Here's what David did, David and staff did this month in that traffic modeling process. At Acres Street, at the intersection there, Porter and Acres, they projected the traffic volumes that are anticipated to be generated by the new library. At the Johnson Street intersection, that's a signalized intersection there, they increased the traffic volume to try to reflect what we think is going to happen. These are some educated guesses here relative to the Norman Regional Porter campus, but we've got some concepts that they have shared with us. We know that the senior center is headed that direction for sure. We also know that they're interested in opening up some road connections that have been closed previously. So that's definitely going to change Porter Avenue. Increased traffic volumes on Porter to reflect the changes in the last 10 years. So we know, like all streets, all major arterials in Norman, traffic is growing. So it's reflected that here in our new models. We extended the 2010 model up to Robinson Street. It didn't go that far back in 2010, so we wanted to see what that would do. And then we focused on, we determined here that on Porter, it's the PM peak hour that generates the largest number of traffic. It's not the AM or the midday, it's the PM peak hour, which is pretty common in Norman. So we took all of that and rolled that into a 3-lane versus a 4-lane traffic model to see what would happen. I'm not going to get into real detail here in the interest of time, but the way traffic engineers measure these things is what they call a level of service analysis. In a very simplified way, this is an A through F grade, if you will, just like in school. And an A is what we want. Rarely do we get A's on any of our arterial streets. We really don't want to get less than a C if we can avoid it. But our own development standards allow us to go to D in real extreme situations. So this chart indicates what the current what the model shows in the projections going forward for a 3-lane and a 4-lane section on Porter. And you can see it by intersection, and you can see some D's and E's in there. Those are bad. We don't want to have those if we can avoid them. We'd like to have more of the A's and B's and C's. And that's really why the 4-lane Porter Avenue was reflected even back in 2010, and it's certainly reflected the same now as the ideal section. So hopefully David has been able to join us now, and he's going to take it from here, I think, in terms of being able to actually show you on the screen what the model told us.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize if you heard my phone barking. If you going to allow me to share the screen then, Sean?
So you're up, David. Yes, I just pulled mine off.
Okay. Can everybody see the model?
I do.
Yes.
Okay. We'll turn on the simulation, and you'll see the ants start crawling across the screen. We're going to start with the 3-lane model. I'm right now at the south end at Alameda. I can scroll up and show you about anything that you want. One of the things to pay close attention to here is the Robinson Street intersection. If you think about you're approaching this intersection from the north, you've got 2 through lanes moving southbound. If we create a 3-lane section south of Robinson, then the right-hand lane has to become a right turn only lane. So it forces everybody who wants to go straight across to the south side of the intersection to be in that inside through lane. And if you notice, the queue of ants in that through lane will move towards the top of the page and stay there as we go further and further into this analysis. The same sort of thing happens at the other end, at the Alameda end. but it's not quite as bad. I think there's a little more southbound traffic than there is northbound traffic, apparently. But you can see in that frame right there, the queue is now at the top of the screen, and it will pretty much stay there. The other thing to notice about the 3-lane section is that, well, first of all, here's the Acres intersection, and if you remember the analysis that was done for that intersection, it recommended a 5-lane cross section on Porter Avenue. So what I have done is I have widened out to make right turn lanes that would sort of mimic that 5-lane cross section. And it doesn't have any problems working at all. There are some issues between Gray and Eufaula. Actually, at times you will start to see the northbound queues from Main Street back up to all the way to Eufaula. If I scroll ahead in time where traffic volumes might be a little heavier, you can see there at that particular time, now it's almost completely filled in between Main and Eufaula. And in fact, it's starting to move south towards Alameda to where Eufaula comes a real bottleneck because nobody can get through. Are there any questions anybody has about the 3-lane before I move and show you the 4-lane?
Yes. So the especially at Main Street, I mean, we don't have it approved yet, but I mean, the long-term vision there is that Main Street will be 2-way eventually, just like Gray Street as well at that intersection. And I would definitely agree about the Robinson Street area. My recommendation really on that would probably be to keep it the way it is from Johnson north to Robinson. But that's just my observation so far. So I appreciate the animated visualization here. It's very helpful. I can't see everybody. Is it anybody, any committee members have any questions so far? Okay.
I can just mention, Councilmember, to your point on Main Street, that again, what David has modeled here is the 2-way traffic on Gray, but still keeping the 1-way traffic on Main.
Right.
I think I'm right about this, David. If we went to the 2-way configuration on Main, the model gets even worse.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, remember, by going to that 2-way, one of our biggest challenges on both Main and Gray is at Porter, where we now have a whole new configuration of turning movements and traffic that do not exist today.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I've switched over to the 4-lane model. And if we go up to Robinson, you'll notice that all those issues that I identified in the 3-lane model have gone away because you've got the 2 lanes going all the way through. If you extended it to Johnson, that would kind of be the same sort of deal. There's no issues down at Alameda either. We do still have some of the same issues that exist now between Main and Gray. At times you will see that there's so many people that want to turn left to go west on Gray Street that the people that are in the lane and afraid to get over right away, it just stops. So if I advance this in time a little bit, I think we can see some of that. The other thing with the 4-lane section is that it doesn't give you exclusive turn lanes. So that's kind of a downside to the 4-lane.
Yeah, major.
Go ahead.
That's a major observation. Where I work is on Porter, and so I just at Porter and Eufaula, so I'm watching that intersection all day, every day. And the lack of a left turn signal and the lack of a dedicated lane to turn left in, I mean, I just observe it all day. People piling up, and then people in the inner lane swerving at the last minute to get into the outer lane so they can avoid the traffic that stopped at the green light. So it's really problematic, in my opinion, not having a left arrow on any of these intersections except Gray.
Well, I was going to say we've mitigated that a little bit at 2 locations. Northbound on Gray, we do provide a left turn arrow, and southbound at Main, we do provide a left turn arrow. We haven't done that at Eufaula. That's something we could do. Sean and I were discussing this earlier today, and I'm not real sure which of the directions would need to have the left turn. We'd need to do some evaluation to see, are there more people trying to go east or west? The same thing at Johnson, you know, obviously with the redevelopment of the hospital complex, that might make southbound left turn a little heavier than northbound left turn. So we could look at the same sort of thing there. But otherwise, you know, Councilmember Holm, you being in this area all the time, you see what's happening on the screen here.
Mhm.
Are there any questions anybody has about the 4-lane model, or do you want to see anything else?
I think Councilmember Hall got disconnected.
She should be coming back on.
Just got a text message from her that she got
There
disconnected.
she is.
Okay.
While we're waiting, I just would mention that,
Okay.
again, these models have been built and established, and we can do anything with them that you wish from now on. Now that David's kind of put the work into getting the baseline here. So if you would like to, for staff to explore options, or like you mentioned, this configuration, this traffic signal change, there's lots of things we can do now that we could not do a month ago.
Okay, I just had a power surge at my house and have missed this complete thing. So could you catch me real quick? I just now got back in.
Where did we lose you, Councilmember? Did you see any modeling at all?
I saw the 3-way or the 3-lane modeling right when Councilmember Holman was getting ready to speak, and I've been
Right.
off the grid ever since. I'm so
Very good.
sorry.
Sorry that happened. No, David will just do a little bit of repeat on the 4-lane section.
Yeah, I started out saying that the 4-lane, of course, the problems that we saw at Robinson in the 3-lane have gone away because you've got that additional through lane. So there's no queuing to the north like there was with the 3-lane model. One of the problems that we talked about while you were out or off was that without the dedicated left turn lanes, it's hard to provide left turn phases. So there aren't any at Johnson right now. There is one northbound at Gray. There is one southbound at Maine. There are none at Eufaula. And I should mention too that with the configuration of the signal heads that we have out there, we can only have one. So we need to make sure that we pick the one that has the most traffic volume on it. So we would need to do some evaluation at Eufaula, at Johnson, to see which one is the heaviest, and if we wanted to implement a scenario like that. There are no issues down here at the Alameda intersection really with anything, because you've got that extra lane going across the intersection. And that's really all that I had shown.
So what does the traffic in a 3-lane look like any other time besides peak traffic?
Well, obviously the PM peak is the heaviest of the
Sure.
3 traditional peak periods. I haven't modeled an off-peak condition.
Well, we're kind of interested in knowing what the other 23 hours of the day are like, actually, because a lot of places, a lot of cities are trying to go away from building mega streets just to accommodate Monday through Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. traffic, and doing it at the expense of safety of pedestrians and visibility of businesses. So I understand we want to do what's best for traffic to make it as convenient and easy for traffic, but we're trying to make it better for people. And so we're interested in what is traffic like on Porter the rest of the day? And does it merit being 4 lanes, the rest of the 23 hours of the day?
We can sure do that, Councilor. Again, that's not the standard of practice in municipal design of roads. Has never been that. I understand what you're saying, but that the standard of practice has been trying to reduce the delay during that peak time, which also reduces the accidents that occur and the road rage and so on and so forth. So we can sure go back and we've got the model. We can sure run that against all those periods and get back to you. But again, that's not the way we've ever designed roads in Norman, or probably
yeah.
in most cities.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's why we're trying to kind of look at ways to change the way we've always done things, especially on a street like this where we're have a real opportunity. I think is why we're trying to explore this before we make a final decision. Is that we've heard from a lot of residents that say, the way it is right now is not good. We don't like it. It doesn't work that well for us as pedestrians. 4 lanes of traffic is more lanes to walk across than 3. At Acres intersection, we're taking an intersection that is currently 3 lanes wide, and we're going to make it 5 lanes wide and put a traffic signal there, which means traffic will now stop there and stack up. So you can see why a lot of pedestrians don't exactly see it as being safer just because there's a traffic light there now. Because now they have to walk across more lanes of traffic, and now there will be traffic building up at that intersection they'll have to walk in front of. And so that's the feedback I've been hearing. I know Councilor Hall's been hearing too about this particular project and their concerns about it remaining the way it is. I think 4-lane would maybe be less of a problem, just from what I see, if it was able to have the left turn for, especially the trucks from the Highland area on Eufaula, when they stop to turn left on Eufaula, and they do it all day, the traffic on the inner lane, just all day long, swerves out from behind them into the outer lane so they don't have to wait. And the trucks usually have to wait until the light turns red. And when it turns red, that's when they make their left turn. And so the traffic that's headed southbound has to wait at their green light for the big semi truck to turn in front of them. And so that's just the stuff I've been observing on the street and some of the feedback I've heard. So I don't know if Councilmember Hall has some more that she'd like to add.
Yeah, and I hope I'm not touching on something that we've already mentioned. I really apologize for that little technical difficulty there, but yeah, we continue to have these discussions, and oh boy, let's see if I'm still. Oh no. Okay, now I can't see the. Did we take that off the screen or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
we did, but I'm getting ready to share some more slides. We're seeing
Oh,
you.
okay. Okay. Well, I guess, I don't need to repeat what was just said. And obviously, I am not a traffic engineer, so I have the utmost respect for the work that you do. And I think this modeling is really kind of amazing that you can do all that. But I do think it's important, as Councilmember Holman said, to look towards the future, which I know you're doing, but we just seem to be in conflict with moving cars along Porter because it has been identified as, an arterial road. But we're also getting ready to try to get something really special accomplished in this corridor that, as you mentioned, Mr. O'Leary, has been rolling around for 10 years now, and lots of things have changed in that time. And we've had I've appreciated the conversations that we've had, and I'm just trying to figure out what our options are to do everything we can to make this a pedestrian friendly corridor, which is what the intention of it is to begin with. And I realized that moving cars and making it pedestrian friendly is a little bit of a challenge on all of this. And we had even spoken about, there is a scenario down the road of maybe it could be converted back to 3-way. So that is something that is not off the table and is still a possibility. And I guess what I'm wondering on the modeling, I was curious about what variables did you consider for the Porter campus, because it's a pretty busy place right now. So what is it that we think is going to increase the traffic there? I mean, what variables were you thinking about when you drew the conclusion that that was going to be even more traffic heavy in the future?
just the plan that I had seen, it's a little more intensive than a hospital is. I mean, hospitals have traffic coming in and out, obviously, and they have emergency vehicles, but some of the other things that were shown on the proposed plan could be spread out more throughout the day than just, whenever hospitals have an emergency.
Okay. So you were looking at the conceptual plan there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes some sense. So then, so the other thing that, when we consider all of the changes that have happened over the last 10 years, and I understand what you're saying about, well, that's how we thought about it back then, but even in the 2014 master plan, it's still talking about the Porter corridor as a special context of sensitive corridors and how important it is to, consider the significance of that and heightened attention to special considerations and all the immediate surroundings. And it also mentions that the, a three-lane operation is still something that ought to be considered. So I guess we just don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves until we've exhausted all of the options, because we have received significant feedback from the people in the neighborhood and a former member of the Porter Corridor steering committee back then, and we're just really have some concerns about are we going to be missing our opportunity to really make this a pedestrian friendly corridor as it's intended. So, I'm not sure what the answer is. In our meeting the other day, we may be shuffling this around because of funding options. So it seems like we still have some time to, think about what our options are. And I also realize, as we've talked about, that, this is you can't consider this just in a vacuum, but where all of the other cars are moving to. So I'm wondering, all of the work that's getting completed on 24th, are we thinking that's going to draw off some traffic from Porter?
If I may, Councilor, we've got a few more slides here, and it's really
Okay.
a good segue from your comments. Your comments are right on point, and again, one thing I would say for sure, you and I have talked about this, that there's absolutely nothing we are doing at Porter and Acres or in the Porter streetscape that would preclude the city council or the city of Norman from going to a road diet in the future. But let me just kind of summarize, or Angelo put these together, summarize what your comprehensive transportation plan says. And this was at the direction of council. Council was very interested back in 2010, 2011, in advance of the adoption of the CPP in 2014 of the Porter Avenue road diet. That's exactly one of the items that we studied. And actually the CPP outlined a way to do that. And here's some of the conditions that they said we needed to do to make that work, to make it work safely and adequately for traffic. So the first issue was the James Garner Avenue extension to Acres. The theory there is we're going to pull traffic off of Porter and put it on James Garner, and that's going to be a better route to the downtown. So that will reduce the volumes on Porter. And of course, as you know, we're in the very late stages of design on that, and that project is scheduled to go forward in the next couple of years. Main and Gray would remain one way. Well, we know that's not happening. In fact, we're going the other direction. So the projection here was if you could keep those two streets, Main and Gray, one way, and extend them, even extending them to the Carter Avenue roundabout, that would really help the road diet on Porter. So here's a case where we're going the absolute opposite direction. We're going the two-way, which is going to make that more difficult at Porter. And then a new north-south couplet on Peters and Crawford between Alameda and Acres. The theory there was that would be another place to put that traffic, and we move it away from Porter. They would have another corridor to go to. that concept has never gained much traction with council or the community, and even with the CPP. We just got kind of, mixed results on that concept. But again, those are the things that the traffic and the comprehensive transportation plan said really had to happen to get to that road diet on Porter. So again, the recent decisions we made here are kind of deviating from that. The elimination of the one-way couplet on Main and Gray, the unlikely creation of the one-way couplet on Crawford and Peters, and then the recent land use changes where we've added a very large library facility right off of Porter and Acres. The land changes we think that are coming to the Porter Hospital campus. All of those things were new after the CPP and going in the direction away from the CPP. So those are things to think about as we go forward. The more recent Porter and Acres Street traffic study offers the more current view of traffic operations, and that 5-lane section is what is really needed to handle traffic that's growing in that area. And Councilor Holman, I would just say that going back, goodness, in that 2010, 2011 period, working with Councilmember Dillingham out here, a lot of this started with the frustration of the neighbors that didn't have a safe pedestrian crossing at Porter, particularly at Acres, because of school access, and they wanted a traffic signal so they could cross more safely under a signalized intersection condition as opposed to the flashing system that we have there. So that's kind of how that project got started in the first place, and the feedback then was a signalized intersection was the ideal, safest condition. So Porter Avenue carries average daily traffic today of 16,310 vehicles. That's per day. That's our 2019 traffic counts in that segment between Acres and Robinson Street. 2-lane roads with continuous 2-way left turn lane operation at levels of service C in the industry, with the volume is 12,000. So that's when you go beyond 12,000, you're getting to that lower level of service into level service E when you get up around 19,000. So we're right in the middle of that right now. We're definitely seeing the growth of traffic on Porter, not the reduction. And this is consistent with that level of service predicted in today's models. So kind of what we see as the next steps, given the fact that a number of the elements specifically identified in the CP are either not complete or we're going the other direction. I mentioned those earlier. That we need to think about that. That's a change from the projection for the road diet. Given the fact that significant development has or is anticipated to occur, we kind of need to see what's going to happen there. Even with what's really going to happen with a full library in operation, we've not really been in operation for a long period of time given the COVID period and the closure of the library. So we're still trying to figure out what's happening there, and we have a lot of unknowns with the hospital. We just think it's a good time to call time out on the road diet like it was back in 2010 and 2014 until these things kind of shake out. And again, there's nothing that you're doing with these two bond projects that precludes you from going back once all the information is shaken out to go to a 3-lane road diet if the council at that time thinks it's a prudent thing to do.
So there's two real questions that kind of hinge on that for me, and with the traffic signals that hang over the street. My concern was that if we're purchasing new traffic overhead signals and they are for the current configuration, what is the cost of replacing those if we wanted to go with the 3-lane configuration? And then if we get, I know we weren't anticipating repaving the street, which was a little bit odd because we always repave the street when we redo the sidewalks and stuff usually. But I can understand with the budget constraints. But now that we might be able to potentially get some federal funding for this with that update the other day, and you mentioned that we might be able to do the overlay. And so that would be a time to strike the street the way we want it, it would seem. So those two were the main kind of things what was hinging when I was talking to Councilmember Hall about, do we need to do this now or not? And it was kind of, what is the cost of those traffic signal heads? Would they need to be changed due to the 3-lane compared to the current situation? And then how soon would we be repaving the street and need to decide how many lanes we want marked on it at that time? So those are
great. Yeah, great questions. I think David can speak to the signalization, but I think everything that we're doing on the project would accommodate either section. Is that right, David?
Well, you would want to change so you had left turn signal heads where we wouldn't have in a 4-lane section. But that cost our staff could handle that in-house. That's really not that expensive. You're talking about a couple of $100 for a signal head.
okay. You don't have to buy a whole new thing.
No.
Turn signal or something. Okay.
Right.
Okay,
The way it would be wired for a 4-lane section would be the same as you'd wired for a 3-lane. So the only thing you'd have to do is swap out the head. That's all you'd have to do.
That was definitely a big one for us because there's, just based on the number of intersections there are that have traffic signals, and then whatever the cost of, because I know the cost of building a whole new signalized intersection for sure, and I know it's not that much to do that on this, but that was a big one for us if we were moving ahead. And then the repaving of the street, and then how that would be painted.
Yeah, and again, as we mentioned the other night, Councilor, that we ran, again, David is running these ACOG numbers too, and ironically, because of the ranking and rating process has changed, if you add a surface overlay, an asphalt overlay to your project, it actually gets you more points. So we think we'd like to add that into the proposal to get the project to qualify. But that's an important point. If we go into the federal funding process, again, that program is built around capacity. They do not let you put federal funds into something that you're going to create a level of service E or F. That would go the other direction from the federal funding purpose. They want cities to make traffic safer and less congested, not the opposite. So that's something that we're going to want to talk about if you're interested in going the other route, because I don't think that's going to work in terms of the funding application. And then, on the striping, that's an easy thing to change. But yes, if there's a desire to go to this road diet and at any point, whether it's with the streetscape project or any other time, it's a little easier to do it when you're doing that striping on an overlay. But just like we just did on Main Street, we had that same discussion on the Main Street streetscape project, and we weren't quite ready to go to the 2-way then, and so we did the striping system as it is, and we can always go back and restripe it pretty cheaply and easily if we go to a 2-way configuration there. So you'll have some options there. Again, there's nothing that you're doing on the streetscape that would preclude you from going back in a few years. It just, again, we're kind of, it's a nice problem to have. We have so much activity and so many changes going on in our downtown. It's affecting the projections into this corridor, and it's really hard to know what's going to really shake out in the end.
Thank you, Sean. Councilmember Hall, do you have any further to add to that?
I just wanted to have you walk through for people who are listening in today, how if we got to a point where we could convert, how would the transition work with the new Porter Acres intersection?
Right. So the proposal now is, and again, we're scheduled to take bids here in 3 or 4 weeks on that project and go into construction by starting in October, November. It is a 5-lane configuration there, and either David or Scott might want to speak to that. But that's one of the questions I think we're going to have to face in the future. Where is if you do go to a road diet, where would that start and end? David talked about the problems up around Robinson Street. So we think that at least the 4 lanes would continue down. And then by the time you transition down to Johnson, you're pretty much at Acres. So I think if you ever went to a road diet on Porter, it would begin at Acres and go south through the downtown area because the traffic is growing more rapidly to the north of Acres. So that would have you coming into that 5-lane section from the north. Then you would transition the 5 lanes starting at Acres back to ultimately to 3. David, any sense of how long that transition would take? Would that get you to gray by the time you got down to 3?
It'd be awfully close to grade, yes.
You got to move that traffic into from 4 or 5 down to 3. And there's a distance that you need to do that safely. And then you would retain that in a 3-lane configuration until some point. Again, probably you have to get back to 5 lanes at Alameda based upon the projections that we're seeing.
And then the other thing that occurred to me, if we make this transition from not having this a city funded project, and you said, I mean, one of the advantages would of going for the federal funding, because we would score so high, was getting that overlay, right? So what, and you also said that we would have some other other things that we would have to meet as far as the traffic ratings. So how would that affect the future of this and a potential conversion to 3-lane if we accepted federal dollars and then wanted to make changes?
Yeah, it's a great question, Councilor. Again, once the federal project is done, then there are no further obligations. So again, what we anticipate doing here, assuming the federal funding approach works for us, is that you would go back with the 4 lanes as it is today. All you're doing is replacing that top 2 inches of asphalt with a new surface, very similar to what we just did on Main Street in the downtown. And the striping would go back into that 4-lane configuration. Then, at that point, that's going to be, let's say that occurs in a year and a half, 2 years. At that point, you're going to be moving toward the James Garner improvements. We're going to be moving toward the 2-way gray improvements, and you'll see those in operation within 2 or 3 years of that. So about 5 years out, you're going to see the impact of these other projects on Porter, and we're going to have a really good idea what a road diet would do in real terms, not just projected terms. I would also think that the Porter campus, the hospital, would be making good progress. We'd have a pretty good idea what the library was doing in terms of traffic, what the senior center was doing in terms of traffic. And so we have a really good idea about all these, what we see right now as future changes in the area.
The other thing that I was thinking about in terms of the best decision of whether to choose to go after the federal dollars on the streetscape project, because your understanding now is that this project would score very high. So are there other things you're anticipating that we would or would not do to get more points, or to would our hands be tied in any other way that you're anticipating, or other changes that we need to be made that we would make in order to compete for that federal money? Or are you pretty confident in the plan that you have now?
Yeah, David's kind of the expert on this ranking process, but I think the reason that the Porter corridor earns more points now is because it is multimodal.
Right.
We are adding a lot of pedestrian improvements with the continuous accessible sidewalks and sidewalk configurations, the streetscape, the lighting, the improved street lighting, the improved intersection at Porter and Acres helps our case because now we're handling traffic more safely. So all of those things, I think, factor into this desire to spend federal dollars on more multimodal improvements than just building roads for cars. The bus route is also an important element here, handling public transportation and bus turnout areas and that sort of thing, bus stops and so on. So I think that David can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's why we're getting so many points on our early projections here.
And I'm glad you brought up the transit piece, because we're potentially looking at relocating our hub, and I was going to ask if we consider that in any of the modeling that you just showed us.
No, that was not included in the modeling.
Okay, so just off the top of your head, what do you think of including? I mean, if that ends up being our hub, then we're going to have how is that going to alter how we have increased traffic of our public buses?
And I definitely see those buses trying to turn into the station and not having a dedicated lane to turn into are going to block that inside lane just like the semi trucks do right now. And traffic will then swerve out of the way into the outer lane to miss them. That's what I absolutely envision happening with the current setup for sure.
Yeah, and now that we've secured that bus transfer station just in recent, well, hopefully soon, then that's going to have to be factored into the Porter corridor design. We'll have to rethink that intersection. That might entail some improvements there, as you say, turn lanes or signalization or something of that nature. But think about, again, that the bus route or the public transportation does not work well on a 3-lane section because now you're blocking the only through lane with a bus when it's stopping. So again, the heavier bus traffic in a corridor leads you away from the road diet, not to it. Unless you can do turnout lanes and things like that. You'll see that we did some of that on Lindsay Street. Lindsay Street also mandated a 4-lane, but we created those bus turnout lanes to get the buses out of the way of the 4 lanes. That's really worked well. It's really, now the bus drivers don't like it because they have a hard time getting back into traffic, but the traffic has really worked well. It's been really safe relative to the bus and car conflict. So those are all, again, public transportation and the growth of that in that corridor is another big change right now that's happening that wasn't in the picture just a few years ago.
All right. Well, and that actually leads me to, I have two more questions. One, just feeding off the whole idea of thinking through how having the transit hub being there. And you mentioned Lindsay. So that was actually a question that came up from one of the neighbors who actually works for Embark. And I think we probably need to put that on the list of how we think about this going forward. And do we have the capacity to have some of the turnouts for the buses? And should we be thinking about incorporating that? And then how does that affect, is that a scoring plus or a scoring minus? Do we know that?
That's probably a scoring plus.
Yeah, just having public transportation is a plus.
Okay.
One of the challenges there, Councilor, as you know, with our recent easement acquisitions, we have very little space to work with. And when we start buying bus turnouts, now we're back into the land acquisition pickle that we found ourselves in already. It's a really difficult corridor to get more right of way.
Yeah, just seems like we need to be thinking about that as well.
Yeah.
And then one of the other, I mean, this came up at the public meeting in July, but it also has come up again recently about just the whole embracing the multimodal concept, which I'm really encouraged that the federal government is recognizing that and recognizing the value of that, and that's going to make us more competitive when we choose to do those things. So that's really good. But I know we talked about bike lanes on Porter and what the challenges are with those. And if in the future we could consider the 3-lane option, would it allow at that point bike lanes? Yeah.
I know we looked at that recently. There's very little width. Right now, we've got 9-foot lanes. They really need to be 12. So if you really break that down and convert that current width to 3 lanes, you're down to a very narrow bike lane, maybe a 3 or 4 foot wide. Today, the standard is 5 or 6. So again, it's probably doable, but it's not ideal without, again, moving that curve and taking more property from the property owners, which is what we've been trying to avoid all along.
So the bad news is bike lanes is still going to be a challenge. The good news is we are not widening Porter and making it any wider than it is now.
Yes, ma'am. And I wish Angela was with us, because I know the Bike Advisory Committee has taken a position that they're not real fond of bike lanes on Porter. They're big bike lane advocates, of course, but I think Porter was viewed by that group as not a route that they really wanted to encourage heavy bike movement. I think that's right. Does that sound right, David?
I think I've heard that, yes. I can definitely ask that at the next meeting though.
Yeah, well, there's just been a lot of conversation about that, and I do think there are some alternatives, because that's that there's lots of side streets along there that are actually probably more pleasant to be riding your bike on anyway. But that's just another issue that's come up several times now with visits with the neighbors. So.
Okay. In that case, so how long would it be, Sean, until the council would need to make a final decision? Do we want to do the road diet or not? Do we need to make that decision now?
My sense of it, no, Councilor, I think there's nothing that we're doing here on the two projects that preclude you from making that decision anytime in the future. I do think if we pursue the federal funding option, that's going to hurt the road diet, would hurt the funding availability. So that's probably the most urgent decision to make. If you're leaning that direction, we probably don't pursue federal funds. I think I'd have to have David run back through those numbers, but generally speaking, the federal funding does not support cities going to less capacity.
And even though we would just be, and really we're not increasing any capacity at all, but the federal funds would be for the sidewalk streetscape part or just for the asphalt overlay part for the whole thing?
Well, now that we're into when you add the asphalt overlay, now they're rating you in terms of a corridor that gets beyond just the streetscape aesthetic enhancement, which is good. Again, that gets us more federal funding opportunities. But now you're having to prove to ODOT that you're designing the road for today's capacity and a 20-year projection. And based upon these models that we saw today, the 20-year projection leads you back to that 4 or 5 lane demand, not a 3.
So we think the current Porter configuration is good for 20 more years if we just leave it the way it is.
Well, again, it's all those unknowns. If the James Garner project occurs like we think and does what we think it's going to do, and if the two-way conversions on Main and Gray don't impact us too negatively, then I think the road diet becomes a good option. But again, there's just so many unknowns. It's really difficult to say for sure what all those things are going to do to just the safe operation of the traffic corridors on Porter.
Well, I guess my last thought would be right now anyway is that part of the special planning corridor stuff was so we could do what we want and not have to have the federal government tell us what to do. But as you mentioned, could be a really tight budget for this whole bond going forward. We might need to explore every option we can. So I definitely support exploring the federal money for this, seeing where it's at, what it can get. And then maybe council can decide then if, what do we want to do? We want to accept this money and go with what we have right now and then wait for James Garner and Gray Street to get done and then revisit. So that's kind of what I think right now. And just again, the two big ones for me being those traffic signal heads and then the cost of repaving or restriping being the ones that made me think, well, we need to make a decision right now because if we go forward and we buy all this stuff, it's going to be hard to go change it. But based on what I'm hearing from you, that change to the traffic signal heads and restriping isn't, as far as expense-wise, a major issue in the future.
Very minimal. Yes, very minimal. Okay. So that I wouldn't let that guide you. That wouldn't really dictate, I think, that decision.
Okay. Any final comment from Lee, Councilmember Hall on this?
Well, I think we had talked right when I lost my connection about taking a look at the traffic simulation not at peak times. So I'm still interested in seeing that. And I'm also, because again, we keep having I guess, new variables to consider. The most recent one, the changes in how we compete for federal funding, which definitely is going to cause more conversation for the Porter Streetscape piece of this. I'd also be interested, I know we've done many of them, but we have literally, we will have literally in just a month or so completely we'll have added 4 new council members. So I'm also interested in having a study session to kind of bring them up to speed on where we are currently. So that would be my final comment.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
No, that's it. I'm just saying, we're happy to do that.
Okay. And I just want to thank you, Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Riesland. I appreciate all the work and the continued conversation. And every time we do this, I learn a little bit more. But I guess my final comment would be that all things considered, especially in this part of town, I really consider it a high priority to be making that shift to traffic calming and pedestrian friendly environment. And we have such a great opportunity with what's going on in Center City, the new library, all of the wonderful work that's been done on Main Street. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the two-way gray works out. We have, the future with the Porter Corridor. We have the 24th Street project that may or may not impact traffic patterns. And so a priority for me is every project that we look at, particularly in Core Norman, that we're looking at putting just as much, if not emphasis, on the pedestrian friendly aspect of it and the multimodal aspect of it while still maintaining a safe environment. So that's where I'm coming from. And I think that's where we're hearing most of the comments from the neighborhood, because I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for being able to use Porter in a completely different way and have it be a pleasant experience, and to be able to hopefully support these businesses and maybe have opportunities for a more pleasant experience along Porter. So I do appreciate your patience and the continued conversation.
Thank you, Councilor. I would just mention that what you just stated is one of the basic principles of the city's comprehensive transportation plan. We heard that over and over again throughout that process, and that plan is built around those principles.
Yep.
So we're right on the same page with you.
Oh, good.
I would just, I think for Councilmember Hall and I, definitely our intent is definitely that Porter is eventually a 3-lane street in the future, for sure. That is where I think we want to go, for sure. But we absolutely respect and trust your judgment and opinion, Sean, and trying to walk in between our constituents and staff recommendations. And I think we'll get there. And I think this has been a very valuable and informative conversation we've had. I hope all the residents around there get a chance to watch the video tonight and give us some feedback. So what I'm understanding is we'd like to have the full council take get an update on maybe you want to wait maybe till October, because we'll have.
I for sure want to wait until all of our new council.
I was going to
say,
yeah. And so till we got a full council, and then get an update on the Porter project, what we're doing, where we're at, and stuff like that. So I think that would be good.
More clarification at that point of the pros and cons of the federal funding piece.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That'll be about the time we'll be ready to submit our applications to ACOG, so we'll know a lot more about that as well.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Okay. We've only got 10 minutes left. Maybe advice on what you would like to do on this issue. I'd be willing to have a special meeting maybe on Wednesday or next Friday. There's a BACA meeting on Thursday at 4. I'd be willing. I don't know if Brenda or staff might have a recommendation on availability next week, but I'd be willing to have a special CPT just for that one remaining agenda item, especially because our 2 other members had to leave so early in the meeting as well.
If I get with Brenda and Daryl, and we'll see what works. But that we can handle a couple more weeks, and we'll see what works best for you all on your schedule. Okay. I think it's about a half an hour item at most. So
okay.
And I'm definitely willing to fit that in. So
Okay.
Yeah, I'm available Wednesday or Friday, so whatever works for staff, or if it's not next week, just let me know.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there any miscellaneous comment from anybody? Just me and Lee here. There's no public. Okay. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Thank you, staff, for all your work. And anybody watching at home, thank you, Councilmember Hall, for all that you're doing with your ward to advocate for better future, I think, in this particular area. So anyway, thank you. We'll see you next time. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.